Hello, colleagues. This is Robert. We're going to get underway very shortly here with our Primero Year in Review for 2025. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I've just pasted in the chat the instructions for using the multilingual speech recognition. We had some requests in previous meetings for this. What I can't speak to is how well they work, but there are some instructions there. If you want to use the multilingual captions, you can go to the More menu on the top of the Teams banner and then select that and go to Language and Speech. And you should be able to select your own language and turn on live captions. If you want to use that feature, it's available for you. Again, I can't guarantee how well it will work. You know, everything AI has its good and bad side here. We will start in 2 minutes. In the meantime, if you want to put your name and where you're coming from, your organization, please do go ahead and include that in the chat, and we will get started in just one moment. Kholoud, if you'd like to turn your microphone on, we can test your sound. Can you try now?
Hi, Robert. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. There you go.
Thanks.
All right. So yeah, please do, as more people join us here, please do feel free to put your information in the chat so we can have a nice um, high-level view of all of the wonderful colleagues and partners in our community that are joining us today. We have lots of people registered, so we will wait for just another minute or two to get as many here with us as possible before we get started. Wow, I'm seeing Uzbekistan, I'm seeing South Sudan, Lebanon. Wow, this is a really great. We have Jordan. Um, what a great mix. Okay, we're a couple minutes in now, and we have a very, very packed agenda for ourselves today. So I am going to get us started um, and begin the webinar. I'll start by just giving everybody a warm welcome and to thanking all of the people who contributed to making this happen. You know, organizing events like this takes a lot of collaboration, a lot of work. So my sincere thanks to everybody who's contributed with ideas, with questions, with support for helping us set this up. I know that it's not the same as an in-person meeting, and you know, virtual meetings are their very own unique challenges, but I think we can make the most of this over the next couple of days. Primero has a very strong community. There's lots of great presentations, speakers and panelists, so lots to keep you engaged and we'll promise to be very interactive in our approach to the next couple of days. So I do want to start just with some basic housekeeping for everyone. This is a recorded meeting, so both the recording and the transcripts will be made available on the Primero Global Meeting microsite. If you haven't seen that microsite before or any of the microsites from the previous global meetings, they're rich with material, lots of great information there, photographs and videos. It's a very fun and great way for us track our experience together in this the Primero journey. So I'd encourage you to go. We're constantly updating those sites with new information. This recording will be hosted there. I also want to flag for everyone, because we did have explicit requests for this, that the multilingual speech recognition feature in Teams is enabled. And if you've just joined, there's a guidance a little bit up in the chat, but you can go on to that More menu button in the top banner there. You can go down and select in the language and speech section to show live captions in the language that you prefer. Your mics are turned off by default. We're going to turn them on later for the question and answer, but this is just so that we can avoid, issues with people unmuting accidentally, etc. And those will be, again, like I said, as we go into the conversation, those will be enabled for us to have a nice interactive question and answer period. The Q&A feature is enabled as well in the Teams meeting, so we would prefer for you to use that as we're talking and going through the opening slides and the opening material. But please, we're all a part of the same community. We'd love to hear from you. Please do use that feature, and then when it comes to the latter half of the webinar, the panel will be happy to answer as many questions and open those conversations up as much as possible. So to give you a quick idea about our session today, this is now a bit of a tradition. We've been doing this for a number of years now, kicking off our global meeting with a public webinar. And we really have impressive registration numbers. I hope even if half the people that registered show up for it today, it will be I think the most attended meeting that we've done in this format. But the idea is to kind of share some information about the things that have happened over the course of the year, both the good and the bad, and some trends, things that we need to be aware of so that we can talk about them openly, plan for them for the coming years. And this year we really have a strong focus on the notion of sustainability and what we can do together to ensure sustainability. After the review presentation, we'll move into a moderated panel, and we have some prepared questions for the panelists. That's what we'll kind of start with. We have to reassure them that they're not going to be ambushed. So we do some preparations with them in advance to have a nice dialogue. And we have an outstanding panel for you this year with really great experts and people working in really, really important areas. So we'll have that discussion, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. The duration of the meeting is about an hour and a half, and then we'll have a short break, and we'll go into our scheduled Primero Global Meeting activities. So with that in mind, and noting that we have a very tight schedule today, I'm going to move on and speak quickly to the objectives of the meeting. Important for us to meet these objectives. So if you don't think that these objectives have been met or that we haven't spoken sufficiently to them, please do raise it with us. We want to be as responsive to our community as possible. So the 5 main objectives here is have fun, share experience, and strengthen and grow this community. It's hard to quantify how valuable that's been in the Primero journey so far, but I think that these meetings have been incredibly rich and incredibly important for the success of Primero and for this community. The second is to develop a mature Primero strategy for strengthening national systems and supporting governments, focusing on sustainability. So this year we're going to really try to talk practically about how we work to make sure that our interventions are sustainable, especially in a context and in circumstances like we've seen this year. Number 3 is developing an understanding of Primero as a digital public good for programs and what that means and what our narrative is and how that impacts and can influence conversations around things like sustainability and costs and budgets and how we plan for the future. This is an important key factor in that. The 4th is a capacity building element to help us evolve and improve and basically do a better job of implementing Primero. And finally, the 5th one is around highlighting and mainstreaming programming and operational frameworks and issues. So in that bucket, we're talking about both technical things and things like interoperability and data security, but also partnerships, all these different things that we've built together over the years. How do we lift them up, strengthen them, and mainstream them? So those are our key objectives for the session. I'll keep moving along here. We always have to start with a bit of perspective. And unfortunately, I think everybody will agree, it has been a very, very difficult year for children. It's been a hard year for a lot of us, but specifically for children. And the statistics and the data show this. And there are some very worrying trends here. But this term, this idea of adversity and how we respond to adversity, I think, is a real theme that we have to unpack and focus on over the next couple of days. Just some basic data here: 123 million individuals forcibly displaced in 2024, and that's a 20 million increase. So, we're talking about, this data is a little bit dated from last year, but the trend is very, very clear. There's a lot of conflict happening in the world and a lot of forcibly displaced people, and we know when that happens, children are among the most impacted. A massive increase overall in people living in poverty. And this is World Bank statistic, but I was very surprised by this. We've kind of seen this number changing in our lifetimes in the opposite direction, and very recently it's turned, and extreme poverty, measured as those living under $3 a day, is increasing pretty dramatically. And what that means for the lives of children and families, obviously, is more risk, more vulnerability, and something we need to be aware of. I wanted to include a statistic as well about children in detention. This is a major part of the work that we do, protecting children, both in the justice space, but also just in this diversion and diverting children away from detention. That's a massive number if you imagine what it would be like to be a young person and be in detention. A lot of these cases as well have to do with migration and other very preventable issues. The other stat I wanted to flag here is about the information that we have on the lived experience of adolescent girls. 1 in 5 is a very almost dramatic statistic of adolescent girls that have experienced intimate partner violence. So gender-based violence is a huge part of what we do with Primero. It often doesn't get the profile and the visibility that it should, but the data and the numbers that we have show a prevalence that is really quite shocking. So these are just a few of the statistics to paint the picture of the year for children. I did want to share a couple more because they're quite dear to us, and we've been working very carefully to make sure that Primero is prepared to support this type of programming. The first one is about children with some form of disability. And I've included this paragraph here because the number is 240 million, but this estimate they're basing on figures that are more inclusive about the understanding of what disability is. In many of our programs, many places where we work, there's this very binary yes or no sort of understanding about what disability is. A child is disabled or not. But over the next couple of days, we'll be talking with colleagues and partners about work we're doing on the child functioning module to have a much more nuanced and better understanding of what the lived experience is of these children with different levels of functioning and different levels of participation in their communities. So really an area that I think we can make enormous progress with if we rally together and mainstream some of these programming approaches. The next stat is on child marriage, on girls being married every 3 seconds. That's just a staggering statistic. And the reason, aside from raising the sort of visibility on this issue around a harmful practice, is that we really, in the Primero space, we really want to see how Primero can be extended and improved and modified to meet sort of the requirements and some of the demands for organizations and governments that are doing more and more work to address harmful practices. So this is something that we're very open to. We've made very minor steps into that sort of programming space, but we'd really like to make sure that Primero can meet the needs of organizations working in that space. And the final stat I'm raising here is on child labor. And over the past couple of years, Primero and Primero partners have become more and more involved in monitoring some of these worst forms of child labor. So 138 million children globally are, affected by child labor. And the stat includes this caveat about despite progress. So there have been some very important changes globally, especially sort of directives from the European Union and everything to see supply chain accountability. And as a result of that and some other really great global initiatives by our partners, we're seeing Primero increasingly being used in this child labor mediation and response space, which is both a great opportunity for us to expand into a new area, but it's also, involves community-based and private sector interventions and therefore has a real dimension that we should be looking at for our other Primero interventions, our other Primero thematic areas. Moving away from all of the sort of dark and gloomy things that are threatening children and families in the world, I think we do need to leave a little space to talk about our own organizations. And it has been an unprecedented year in many ways for the organizations that we're working for, that many of you work for, that I work for, and who we represent. And this affects us all personally as well. But it does have a whole myriad of effects on our ability to program, the decisions that we make, the sustainability element again. And so a real focus of our conversation is how do we continue to do the work that we do when we're being undermined, both, financially in the spaces that we work. There's even increasingly less, sort of humanitarian access, a lot of very negative trends in the world today. So not just the funding cuts, not just the fact that very, very good, very successful programs are being drawn back and in some cases even discontinued for lack of funds. It's a very emotionally challenging reality. But I think it's an oversimplification to say that it all comes from one place and that it's all a result of one government or one decision. I think it's very much a global trend. And there's this very interesting graphic from a colleague that I follow on LinkedIn named Liew and does a lot of work analyzing. It's not just USAID. This is across the board. All of our major donors are making major cuts to their ODA. And I think this is the new reality that we have to learn to work within. So we have tons of unmet needs and gaps across sectors that we have to do a better job on in planning and understanding where to invest in and where to make where we can make the most impact to not leave people behind. But also there's more competition for fewer resources. And I say this very deliberately because I think that what we're doing here as a community around Primero, although it's a technology intervention, it's a technology initiative, more than anything, it's cost saving. It's a cost saving initiative that strengthens the existing networks and fabric of services and protection that are already out there in the world. And it really helps us not have to compete so much, not only with each other for donor resources, but also for space and relevance in those program areas that we share and work in. Just really, I think there's an important piece of analysis to be done there. And I think this broadly applies to digital public goods. And I hope that's something that we'll have a chance to talk about later in the session. And the final point that I want to make here that I don't think maybe, bubbles up to the surface enough is the amount of lost talent and capacity that we're seeing within our organizations, across our partnerships. Really, really talented people, really committed people, that because of the funding situation, because of changes to organization, are losing their jobs or deciding to go and work in other sectors and other fields. So the impact of this will be felt for a long time, not only in terms of what we're able to deliver, but also in those important sort of less tangible functions like mentorship and partnership and that fabric and that experience and expertise that we're losing. So not to paint such a doom and gloom picture of it, but 2025 has not been a good year in many ways. So the question is, how do we respond to all of these challenges? And what role can Primero play in that and this community? So I can only bring my perspective to this. I really hope you'll choose to chime in and offer your suggestions and your thoughts to this as well. But from my point of view, we have some very strong tools to help us respond to these challenges. And just to give everybody a sort of, an initial flavor of what I would propose, the first and foremost is that we have to focus on scale. And so things that we do very, very well, but only in one small place, those are wonderful and those are successful stories. But when we're challenged the way we are now with resources, with instability, we have to be able to reach more and more and more of these vulnerable populations and communities with these services. And how do we do that in a time when we're seeing more and more constraints? So for me, the answer is the workforce. That is the embodiment of how services are delivered. Prevention and protection services are delivered, and we have to be able to work and provide support for that population, for that workforce at scale. So everything we do has to be designed for and take that into account. We need to be able to localize, we need to be able to deploy, we need to be able to support at massive scale. The gap is huge. There is no shortage of work to go around. So how are we going to organize ourselves and plan for a future where we can reach more and more with increasingly fewer resources? The important detail also about the workforce is the role they play in harnessing and gathering data. And I chose this image very, very, very deliberately because that information that I provided before at the beginning of the session, it really helped us understand what's happening in the lives of individual children and families. And if we don't have that information, if we don't have that data, we don't even have that story to tell. We don't even have those points to use in our advocacy. So when I see data, the word data beside a picture like this of some boys, I think very often people think of data as a impersonal, reducing people to just, pieces of information and numbers and data points. But I see it another way. I see it a different way. I see that every one of the children in this image or the children and families that we were speaking about earlier, they deserve to have their story told and they deserve to have people advocating for them. And for us to be able to do that in a meaningful way, that data has to be reliable, it has to be regular, and it has to be of high quality. And so when you combine that previous slide that I shared about the workforce and you combine the power of data, I think really what we're interested in seeing is how do we make that workforce more effective in what they do, yeah, but also generating good quality, timely data that can be used to make the case both at the national level with government counterparts and at international level with global counterparts for pointed and strategic interventions to meet this myriad of challenges and needs. So I want to talk a lot about the relationship between the user experience and the quality of data, and how if we focus on that, if we focus on our end users and building their capacity and giving them the tools that they need to do their job, the data can come from that. And the third important point here is fostering these strong partnerships at national and global level, which is what we're doing here today. And I think we have a pretty good track record of that. So my initiative in this space is to think about, Primero as the glue that combine together many, many different actors in a space that are working towards a set of common goals, that are all facing challenges, but that can bring together those strengths that we have, our partnerships, the quality of the data that we're able to generate, and the direct support that we're providing to frontline workers. And those are our strengths, and this is how we weather this storm of adversity and continue to have impact at scale. I want to share a short video with everyone. I am going to briefly, attempt to do this without making a mess of it, but I am going to briefly change over to my browser, and hopefully I've set this up properly so that you can hear it. And for those of you who may have already seen this before, I apologize. I'm very proud of it, so I want as many people to see it as possible. So allow me 1 second here. Make sure the audio is on. And I'm going to share this video of a very, very special person named Ola working in Amman, Jordan. And when you watch this video, what I would like you to think about is a day in the life of Ola and what it's like to be a person that works with vulnerable children and families every day, and what it means to somebody like that to have a digital tool that helps them do their job. So with that, I'm going to play this video for you.
كعاملة اجتماعية كل يوم يجلب تحديات جديدة وآمال جديدة. مع بريميرو لم نعد نعمل بمفردنا، يربطني بكل من يلعب دورا في حياة الطفل. المدارس، المستشفيات، العائلات. بريميرو يسمح لنا بمشاركة المعلومات الحيوية بسرعة وأمان، حتى لا يترك أحد دون تقديم خدمة أو مساعدة، سواء كنت في مكتبي أو أزور شخصاً محتاجاً. كل ما أحتاجه في متناول يدي. معاً نغير الحياة اتصالاً تلو الآخر، لأن عندما نعمل كواحد نجعل كل جهد ذا قيمة.
So I hope everybody could hear that okay, and I hope that there was at least some emotional response, because that's what I want to speak about next. I want to speak about user experience and how important and vital that is to the success of the work that we're doing. So allow me to just get my slides back up for you, and we'll go into that section of the conversation. It's an often overlooked part of the work that we do, but really the success of a digital intervention, of a digital product like Primero, has everything to do with how people feel when they're using it. So, we're not just talking about uptake and adoption, we're talking about the sense of support that somebody feels, the sense of of being served that somebody feels when they are using a digital product. And I use this example all the time when I talk to governments and I talk to partners in the field. I ask them if I install a new application on my phone because somebody told me it's good or it's useful, and within a few minutes I can't understand how it works or how it's going to help me, chances are I will either delete it from my phone or I will just leave it there and forget about it. And that largely has to do with how much time you've spent understanding the needs of the people that are going to use your product. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because in our panel later, we have a nice mix of both digital experts and child protection and social services experts. And I want to play a little bit with that theme of understanding the needs of this workforce and how we best serve them. So let's first take a look at how many users we currently have in the Primero universe. And this is a nice steady upward incline. You can see there we've been tracking this since 2016. I can't see everybody who is on the call right now, but I imagine there are at least a few people on the call that belong to that first 300 almost 10 years ago. Those first few years when we were working with cohorts of only 20 or 30 people. And now we're talking about 20,000 people. And this number is almost certainly underreported. So you can see that we're growing pretty significantly. And every one of these 19,550 people, imagine that they're like an Ola, like from the video that you just saw. And imagine they're waking up and they're busy and they have a lot of work and their work is very documentation heavy. How do we understand what value add means for Ola? You have to do that through direct engagement with your users. So you don't get numbers like this without having some degree of success with user experience. Not all of these people are being forced to use Primero. They're choosing to use it because it helps them do what they want to do, which is provide services and support. So we have a 25% increase this year. We hope this number continues to go up and up. But we have to be able to support that user base at that scale with essentially the same resources that we have now. So how do we continue to do that? Who are we working with? And understanding our workforce is a huge part of what we need to do to be sustainable at scale. So we have some new data this year because of a new type of reporting that we're doing that allows us to kind of do a cross-section of who the main user organizations are in Primero. So I think what's interesting about this data is that for categories like government, we don't have disaggregation by ministry, by district authority, by municipal authority. They're all just grouped into government, which is something we'll have to work on. But this is lifetime. This is over the course of the lifespan of Primero, the number of users active users that we've had. So you can see this is just a selection of some of our biggest partners, biggest global partners. But what's missing here? A part that I think is really glaring and missing from this story is national actors, national partners. Which is a little bit more difficult for us to track because they have very different configurations. They're represented by different types of users and roles in the system. But increasingly, this is what we want to do is we want to understand who the users are, what exactly their needs are, and what types of changes and improvements and modification will make them even more bound to us and more engaged with the product. That's where we see success, and that's where we see the good data outcomes as well. I really like this graphic because it's talking about user experience. It's talking about a sort of maturity pathway for user experience. So take that emotional response that we saw from Ola, and imagine that with a social worker or child protection worker that's in the last mile setting that has stacks of paper and documents on their desk and that struggles to do all the paperwork that they're required to do every week. And even just solving some small problems with, for example, reducing duplication or creating some automatic reports or generating some meaningful statistics, or even giving them reminders, things that are saving them 10 minutes here and 15 minutes there, and increasing that emotional response of, oh, I like this app and this app is helping me and therefore I want to use it. I'm using it actively. Every one of those users that has that type of experience with Primero is providing us with more frequent, higher quality, and more reliable information about the program, about where they're working, and informing our decisions and our ability to not only to manage these programs, but to scale them up, to reach more people, to advocate for them, to fund them. So later in the 2-day meeting, we're going to be talking more about user experience. We're going to be talking about the need for our users and our community to be providing us with these ideas so that we can make the kinds of investments that are going to have long-term impact. I am going to jump ahead now. I'm a little behind schedule, but okay. I wanted to share with you a pretty exciting milestone. You know, we are so very close to 100, and I told myself, you know, the day that we get to 100 live implementations, I'm going to throw a big party. It's not where we expected to be at this time of the year. There has been actually a slight slowdown in 2025. But we are on a trajectory to meet our long-term goals. We're introducing different kinds of implementations now. Over the next couple of days, we'll hear from partners in places like Pakistan, where the government is leading the implementation, China, for example, where the government is leading the implementation, and other places where there's just a single organization working with a very specific population. So these, by all means, are not identical implementations. They vary very much in terms of the scope and scale, who the partners are, the populations they're trying to support. And this brings me to my next point, which is scale is critical, but it must be sustainable. And if we are just trying to scale up and roll out and get Primero out in as many places as possible without having a very deliberate strategy for supporting it and sustaining it in the long term, we're not helping. You know, this is only going to introduce problems later. So I did want to do a quick call out of a few implementations that have a very, very interesting sustainability journey to them. And the first one I'm going to look at is Romania. So Romania started several years ago, and it started as a fully supported implementation. And for those of you who are familiar with these tiers, a tier 3 implementation means fully hosted on UNICEF's Microsoft Azure Cloud, a fully supported, technically supported implementation. Well, over the period of a couple of years, that transitioned away from UNICEF hosting the production data to the government hosting that through a technology partner. And then another year later, the government taking an even greater role in that implementation through their technology partner. And then finally, the government taking over the entire implementation and leading it independently. So this is what we call system strengthening. This is a very, very clear and solid example of a government investing in capacity, understanding the potential that Primero represented for them. It took some time for us to advocate for that, but that transition happened, and now it's fully in the ownership of the ministry. So I think a really exceptional example. They recently published well, I shouldn't say recently, a few months ago published an evaluation on this, and now Primero is one of the main data sources for their the national statistical insights on children with vulnerabilities. So not just an information management system for caseworkers, but actually becoming a very, very relevant statistical tool in the country. And you know, statistical tools influence national policy. So something to be very proud of. I think, the team in Romania just done a wonderful job with this, and they deserve a lot of praise. Another example on the same sustainability focus is the work in Pakistan. And we do have colleagues from the Pakistan country office that are going to talk in detail and present on this information later today. But I did want to share a few things because it's such an exceptional and interesting implementation. Similar to Romania, the government, these 4 provincial governments and the one ICT federal government, these are completely from day one led by national partners. So installed, supported, hosted nationally. And they have some very impressive scope for the short time that they've been live, reaching dozens and dozens of organizations and tens of thousands of children. And this is the beginning of something that I think that we'll continue to look at over time to see high capacity governments with good digital capabilities and a really nicely properly designed child protection program can take a product like this very, very far, nationalize it, scale it, and that is really the dream come true for us in this work, is the idea that we can deliver something that is of high enough quality and with a strong enough support and community network that governments are going to want to run it themselves. So great work to the team in Pakistan, another champion of sustainability, and we are here to support, and hopefully you'll all join the sessions later to hear more details from the country office colleagues. The last one I wanted to call out is a very different one, this one from Iraq. So Iraq's a very different scenario where the Primero implementation started as a humanitarian intervention. So, and largely was driven by humanitarian coordination networks, lots of different organizations, all in the same place, looking for where they can provide their services and how those services can meet and address gaps. And what Primero has done in this scenario is create a network, this network of interconnected service providers and partners that agree on their framework of intervention. And that is represented in Primero. And you can see over 1,200 users, almost 60,000 cases. This is just scratching the surface of what this can become, because although it started as a humanitarian intervention, now that acute emergency phase has passed and we're moving into a more development context, the national government is now taking this up and beginning the process of planning to scale it as a national tool. So these are 3 very different examples of how Primero can be implemented in a sustainable fashion with government leadership and how we can have that impact at scale. I just thought I'd really like to shine a light on some good examples here before we move into this next session. And we'll be coming up with to our moderated panel. Just a few more things that I'd like to point out before we do that. So very often when we talk about scale, we misconstrue scale for more places, more countries, to make that number move from 97 to 100 to 110 to 120, and that's scale. But scale is much more complex than that. It's much more difficult than that. And I think sometimes we lose track of the importance of investing in the quality and investing in the reach of the existing implementations that we have. And this is why I like, and thank you, Liew, for sharing the dashboard. This is why I like the Iraq example so much, is that, there is almost no limit to the number of partners, thematic areas of programming that can be added to an existing Primero implementation, as long as the partners agree and they're working to a common standard and they have their principles in the right place. It's very, very easy to take a small Primero and add on to it. It's easy to do that without a lot of additional cost. It's easy to do that without a lot of additional risk, and it actually builds that fabric, that network. It actually has a whole bunch of intangible benefits. For example, in this very difficult year that we've been through, We've seen some very, very big, very successful national programs with dozens of different partners working in them. We've seen those partners be defunded. They'd have to leave. They'd have to scale down their programs. This is where Primero's been fantastic. The CPIMS especially has done really, really good work through the interagency partnerships, through the Alliance for Child Protection Humanitarian Action and the AOR to say, okay, we have this giant caseload, and we used to have 1,200 caseworkers, but now we only have 600 caseworkers. And so what are we going to do? In a previous time, that would have meant that thousands and thousands of cases just had no continuity whatsoever. But because these partners were working together on a shared platform, they were able to identify risks. They were able to triage important cases, to transfer cases to organizations that were staying. These are important responsibilities and accountabilities that we have that are very, very difficult for us to operationalize if we're all using different systems and if those systems aren't to common sets of standards. So I really want to make this point that it's not just about getting a bigger and bigger number of countries that we work in. It's also about enriching and strengthening and scaling up the existing implementations that we have to bring in more partners to reach those harder to reach areas, to get those last mile communities within scope of those implementations. I just wanted to share our latest caseload. I do think this is slightly underreported. Again, this is the second time I've had to show something just under the milestone we were hoping to reach. So we just shy of 100 live installations, and we're just shy of 2 million here on our latest data. But I think very, very soon we'll refresh our dashboard and we'll see that this is actually in excess of 2 million now. But it's a substantial caseload. Every single one of those is an individual human being that has specific needs and needs a tailored and responsible plan for their support. So it's impressive. That's the work that all of you are doing. That's the work that our partners are doing, and they deserve all the credit for this. So bravo for it. It's a very impressive achievement. That's a 16% increase in cases over the year. Again, we were hoping for something like 25, but it's been a very difficult year, and I think we should be happy with how far we've come. So just getting to the end of my presentation here, over the next 2 days, what I wanted to be very clear about, I hope many of you have registered to join. I hope that you'll be available to participate. And now we're going to just briefly, we're going to talk about programs and partnerships, Primero products and services, and the plan that we have for our future. It's not a lot of time to do this. We would normally do this over 3 full in-person days, but we will make do. So I appreciate you all being here and a part of this and for listening to me. And now I would like to move to our panel. So let me just make sure that all the panelists are here. Bolaji, I see you, and you can unmute your mic.
Okay. Hi, Robert. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Bolaji. Okay, I hear you loud and clear. Rebecca, are you here with us? And can I get you to speak so we can hear your voice?
Yes, I'm here, and I hope you can hear me clearly. Just a second.
I hear you and I see you. Great. Kholoud, you with us?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Great. Wonderful to have you. Great to see you. And Meng, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Good to be here and see everyone.
Okay, wonderful. Good to hear and see all of you as well. I'm just going to navigate to my questions here, so I have them right in front of me. And I'm going to do a nice, very flattering round of introductions because I feel quite privileged to have this panel with us. This is, it's always a bit of a test when you go and ask people if they can join a panel for your webinar. You find out who your friends are. So I'll start by saying welcome to Meng. who's the chief of the Digital Center of Excellence with UNICEF ICTD in Nairobi, and a longtime colleague and a big supporter of Primero. So welcome, Meng. Next, I will introduce Rebecca Smith, who's the Global Head of Child Protection Programs at Save the Children International. We've just recently been on a Primero board meeting together. Very happy that you're second day in a row sparing some time for us. Rebecca, welcome. And Kholoud. Kholoud is a longtime friend and colleague with us, coming to us from UNRWA. She's the Chief of Social Services, and she's been an active member in our Primero Coordination Committee for a number of years now. Welcome, Kholoud. And finally, Bolaji Ayodeji is the DP. I love, this is my favorite title of all the titles of people that I work with. He is a Digital Public Goods Evangelist and Technical Coordinator at the Digital Public Goods Alliance, a very important organization that we depend a lot on. So welcome to the panel. We've got a nice amount of time. I would encourage our participants to use the chat or the Q&A to ask any questions that you have, but we're going to start with some prepared questions that I shared in advance with the panel so that we can hear about them, hear about their experiences and their organizations. So don't be afraid to plug all your good work and tell us the wonderful things that are keeping you busy. I think I'm going to start with this question for you, Becky. So because this one comes up a lot, it's really about the work that caseworkers do. And I know Save the Children has a lot of caseworkers out there in the world. So this one is about how they feel as a workforce. The question is, I think it's important that caseworkers feel like their work is appreciated. They do a lot of difficult things and they don't always get recognition for what they do. How can we address that problem? Over to you, Becky, for your thoughts on that.
So, I mean, I think, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to support high quality child protection programming without really strong caseworkers. And one of the ways that we're thinking about this is thinking about, how do we professionalize the workforce? What are the competencies that caseworkers need? And how do we showcase that? But also, how do they progress in their career so that you can start, and work your way up from working at the community level, identification and referral, to then becoming an accredited social worker in a country or context. And I think that that's something that we're trying to think about. How do we think about on-the-job learning and support for caseworkers, recognizing the work that they're doing? So much of a good quality caseworker comes from actually practicing rather than reading or learning. So how do we do more? How do we support mentorship and growth and make sure that supervision is integrated into the growth of a caseworker so that it's not just about ticking boxes, but it's supporting a caseworker who's working with very challenging context, and then thinking about the competencies that they need to progress and become professionals. And the more that we can support that in a united way, I think is really important.
Great. So I heard some really strong, important keywords there. I heard mentorship and I heard supervision. These are really important factors. There's been a lot of talk, within UNICEF, but also in our conversations with different Primero implementations about how many of these important sort of leadership and supervisory colleagues are either moving on or that we're losing. Is that something that you're experiencing at all in Save the Children? And how do you think that's going to impact the next generation of caseworkers that we're trying to build up?
I think, we've lost so much talent across the globally, and we're also seeing more and more people taking on even bigger caseloads, having to do multiple issues or topics that they might not have covered before if they were focusing specifically on one issue. And the other challenge is just looking at the skill sets that people have and and how do they grow if they do have to take on a larger caseload or have to look at a different topic that they haven't, subthematic area of expertise that they haven't had to deal with before. So that's one of the areas we've been thinking about. And also, if someone can't continue with an organization or a project ends, how do we support that person to then find a role in something else? And what is the way that we can work together across organizations to really support that talent and growth? But it is something we're definitely facing, and a huge amount of work falls on the caseworker.
Well, I liked your reaction, though. It's very, we have to work in solidarity as well and remember that we're all people, and this is impacting a lot of individuals and families. So I like that, what you said about helping them move on in those situations as well. But we're doing everything we can to keep everybody here and with us. And I'm going to direct the next question to Kholoud from UNRWA. So maybe Kholoud, when you answer the question for me, maybe you can give me a little context from your work there in UNRWA. But this one is about the multi-sectoral nature of the work, and being the social services lead, I imagine this is very relevant for you. So the question is, in the past, we were accustomed to every service provider or sector having a different system that they use to manage their data and their work. Can you explain how Primero is helping you to integrate service delivery across the sectors in your program or organization?
Yes, thank you very much, Robert. Actually, using Primero for UNRWA, as you know, we work in the 5 UNRWA area of operations, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Gaza, and the West Bank. And using it came in time with our social work reform, which Rebecca has just mentioned, on how we can really build the capacities of our social work. So it came in time when we started to professionalize our social workforce. So it was a key pillar of our social work reform, using Primero for all the social workforce that we have in the 5 fields of operation, having a standardized platform for all the social workforce that is safe and secured. It is where we use the user role-based access for our social workers. Also, I'd like maybe also to pinpoint on the issue that was also raised by Rebecca on the supervision. Last year, we managed to have build the capacities of our social workforce and the supervisors on having a diploma based on the type of cases that they've been handling and accredited by a recognized school of social work in Lebanon. So we had like a supervision diploma, and part of the having this diploma was using the cases that they've been using on a daily basis and dealing with. And coaching and mentoring was a key element of that. Having it on multi-sectorial, yes, it helped us addressing a number of issues because we're trying, as UNRWA, we provide different types of services. I mean, health services, education services, relief and humanitarian support. So it was really helpful having such a data in place, which can support our service delivery in the different areas. More importantly, also the emergency context. As you know, at the beginning of the war in Gaza, our staff, before the war, they were using Primero. At the beginning of the war, it was put on hold for a short period, and then they felt the need to use again Primero and go back to the system because it's more helpful. It gives them more accurate and reliable data, and thus help them in providing the support and the various type of services. And in Gaza, actually, it was very, very critical using Primero, especially when it comes to, this is the first time that we as UNRWA, that we come across the unaccompanied and separated children, okay? So this is the first time that we've been facing such an issue, and using Primero helped us a lot in really having good and reliable data on these children, and providing the on time the type of services that they were in need, be it cash, be it referral to other organizations and service providers, and in an efficient manner. Also providing services to children with disabilities, and try to this referral relationship and referral process among the different partners, like how we work together with the humanity inclusion when it comes to children with disabilities. So this was using the data that we have was really critical in that domain. So in addition, of course, to cash and relief and trying to meet the vital needs of children in designated shelters in Gaza, and the same in West Bank also, with the escalations that is taking place in the northern of West Bank. Also having the data was very influential to provide the support on time. I hope I answered your question, Robert.
You did. UNRWA is just such a unique example of a single organization that's providing so many different services across so many sectors. Very, very unique. I remember from the earliest days thinking, how is Primero going to work in this context? But I'm super happy to hear that, especially with that outbreak of conflict in Gaza, that the teams were able to continue to use it in a meaningful way. So I'm going to now pivot a little bit over to a technology question. I'm going to direct this one to Phui Meng. And the reason I'm going to connect UNRWA to Phui Meng is that maybe some of you have heard this, but the new Chief Information Officer, so the top director for information technology in UNICEF, came to us from UNRWA. And he is now Phui Meng's boss. So I'm going to ask a pointed question about technology because he made some decisions in those early days with UNRWA about Primero. So this one's for you, Phui Meng. So what do you say to governments who are concerned about open source software? I remember this was a concern with UNRWA. Is there a reason to be concerned about open software being less secure? And this is what I hear where I'm working, and I'm struggling to counter that argument with my counterparts. So what would you say to that, Phui Meng?
Thank you, Robert. I feel like this is a good question since we have Kholoud here, because UNRWA actually is a lived example of this. Open source, actually, a lot of the governments that never used open source before thought that, this is going to be unmanageable, this is not going to be safe, and so forth. But really, over and over again, we actually have proven we as a collective, since we have colleagues from DPGA as well, is that open source is not only safe, but at the same time, it actually creates the community for the community to work on, and it actually avoid vendor lock-in and so forth. So from that perspective, what UNICEF is trying to do is that we're not only actively promoting Primero, which is an open source software, using real life example of how this benefits government to lower down their total cost of ownership, to give them the sure ability of control over their own software and system, which is why it's great to see there are so many examples from Primero that transition of ownership from Primero central, like moving it to tier 1, whereby the country office, the governments are controlling it. So I find that in our line of work in UNICEF, Primero as a strong example demonstrating to government that it's not only solving the problems on the ground, but it's also giving them control, make sure everything is safe, and giving them sustainability as well. So I'm going to pause there. Of course, there are more examples that I can hear. I can see that Bolaji might want to introduce, but over back to you, Robert.
Thanks, Phui Meng. That's a great response, and it gives me a perfect segue into a question for Bolaji, because this is the question that I hear most frequently, from especially from technical counterparts within government. So, you know, a lot of the work that we do is advocacy and talking about the benefits of one course of action compared to another one. So, Bolaji, here's one that's right up your alley, and I want you to tell us what you think about this one. The question is, what's the difference between an open source app and digital public good?
Thanks, Robert. I think that's a very interesting question. It's pretty much one that I have to talk about almost every week, mostly because it comes up in different conversations. And one way I like to start when I talk about this is to clarify the fact that DPGs are open source solutions, but we often say that not all open source solutions are DPGs. And so that's where, you know, the difference comes in fundamentally. And so when we try to define what an open source solution is, like in the case of Primero, it pretty much doesn't also just mean the solution is made public, as in it's easily accessible, but that there are certain licenses that guide the ability for people to use that solution. And so that's pretty much holding on to the four freedoms of open source, as we technically refer to that, which is the freedom to use, to study, to share, modify, and redistribute that solution, which are kind of like the principles that, you know, support Meng's point earlier around security, because, you know, you could use, study, share, modify, gives more ability for people to actually find security issues in open source solutions better than it would happen in closed source solutions cases in that sense. And so that's what open source is, generally speaking. When it comes to digital public goods, we then say there are extra components that make them that. And so it's the same general public good principle, you know, the same way we think about road networks in that sense, which is resources that connect all of us together. But in this case, we're just adding digital to it. And so now it becomes something much more larger. But I'd like you to keep the context of the road networks I mentioned, because it shows how much of a public infrastructure this is. I think you would agree that roads are so important that we pretty much not function without them. And that's how we also are working to ensure that, you know, stakeholders and governments understand the value of the solutions, because they are as important as roads in that sense, in how it connects to work that we do on different work streams. And so for starters, DPGs would be an open source solutions that help advance the UN SDGs, about 17 of those goals. And these are goals that, you know, different UN member states use to also coordinate efforts around different social impact work. And so there is that element, which would mean that, you know, these solutions would have to, you know, either be adherent to one of those goals, helping advance it in one way or the other. There are also different SDG targets. And so you would have digital public goods also supporting one of those targets. And the second core addition would be that the solutions are designed in ways that they adhere to certain privacy and applicable laws. And this is very important because even in the case of Primero, it's a solution that is also used across different regions. It's been a pleasure also looking at the chart and seeing all the different geographical regions in which the solution is being used. And we would agree that each of these jurisdictions also have different laws that guide how the solutions are being used. And so it's very important that engineers think differently about, you know, how to design the solution, where it starts from and adherence to these applicable laws in that sense. And this could cover, you know, both privacy laws, it could cover user laws, you know, accessibility laws, the different laws that guide the solutions. And so depending on the scope of the solution, you know, they prove the adherence to each of these laws. And the last component would be the do no harm parts, which is very critical for a solution like Primero that also deals with child data and a lot of stuff that requires a lot of security. And so in this context is pretty much redefining how we think about how we design this solution, at least speaking as an engineer also who works around all of this, is that, you know, now we have to ask ourselves, if you're collecting data, are we sure we're collecting just enough data that the solution needs to function? You might have heard or seen in several solutions where, you know, if you have the chance to collect data, you just collect as many as possible. And we often refer to that as data minimization. So all of these different principles around how data is collected, how data is stored, how data is transferred, I think interoperability is also a very important conversation Primero. So, you know, what happens when that exchange is happening? And so all the different practices that goes into that process is kind of like what distinguishes digital public goods from open source solutions, which would mean that there are perhaps other solutions out there that are great, but do not, you know, keep these principles and practices in mind when they design them. And so the entire DPG ecosystem is redefining that process and also helping shape new best practices that, engineers, development partners use to, design these solutions enough that, all the Primero colleagues who are also using these solutions could have better design digital technologies to help advance, child protection services. And so that's how I'll, try to define that. I hope that's not too technical, but also a bit of non-technical for you. But yeah, thanks, Robert.
Great answer. I'll use that in my next conversation. So open source plus, right? And you said some very important, key words there. The principle of do no harm is central to what we do with Primero and in general in across protection work. You also mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which, as we all know, are in a very critical moment right now. And my follow-up question, Bolaji, is what happens after 2030? What do digital public goods become after 2030?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think it's something that has also come up internally. We're aware also that we just have less than 5 years now to that. But I think all the different stakeholders are also figuring out what that would look like, generally speaking. But I could start by saying the idea of digital public goods, it's a community shared resource that doesn't hinge alone on the goals themselves. And so when we get to 2030, depending on what would happen, if there would be an restructuring, whatever that would look like, it doesn't mean DPGs are going away in that sense. And so in the past years, we've had different stakeholders who have done great work. It would only be an advancement of that in that sense. And that's why I like that you said it's open source plus. And so there are other pluses in that sense that still drives that work. And I think even in the UN ecosystem and all our UN multilaterals that we also work with, there's so much immense value that the solutions have provided in that sense. And so I can say that definitely we would still keep evolving on this space while we all figure out, what happens after the SDGs at the country level, at a regional level, also for the NGOs and CSOs that also work around all of these digital public goods. I think the key word here is to say that it's a community shared resource. It includes all different parties who also work around the solutions themselves.
Great answer. I put you on the spot there. I didn't expect you to have such a good answer, actually. Thanks for that. I'm going to use that to pivot back to you, Becky, with another question, because we heard about do no harm there, a very core child protection principle. And I think this question is also a little bit focused on principle. And it's about the Save the Children's been involved in Primero and in the legacy system that existed before Primero all the way back to 2005. So what is it about Primero, this platform, for programs focused on child protection, case management, and social services that makes it essential? Why this and not some other thing, some other software, some other, what makes it essential to child protection program?
I mean, I think one is that it's user friendly and that it is based around we're able to have consistency across our child protection cases, regions, and context. And we know that it's got data protection that's connected into it. It has consistent information so that we can have comparable information, which helps with aggregated results. And it helps us to improve our decision making because there's reliable data that stakeholders can then use, whether or not it's on service provision or following up with cases, allocating resources, and really looking at trends across some of our case management that we're seeing with our workload. And then it also helps the caseworker themselves and the supervisor in terms of accountability and making sure that the children and young people are getting the services and support that they need in a timely way. And it helps with our coordination on service gaps. So I think that it's something that we recognized a need for a very long time ago, along with a lot of other organizations, especially when we were looking at family tracing and reunification, where we needed to work across agencies and across government actors, et cetera, on how do we share information safely. And I think that we've invested so much time and energy in this and getting it right. And there's been a lot of recent enhancements that are helping for more consistent data collection on case management across the forms, et cetera. that I think it is definitely a user-friendly platform that we will continue to support for a long period of time.
Great. I like that, you know, there's a recognition in that this has always been interagency. It's since its very early sort of days, even before Primero existed, there was a very clear idea that we have to find the right balance between being able to keep data safe, personal data, sensitive data, and having to share data when necessary in order to deliver services, in order to be able to provide services and protection. Family tracing unification is a perfect example of that. You can have a whole list of children that are separated or unaccompanied, but if you don't have a way to collect information from adult caregivers and family members about who those children are, you often can't do that by yourself. So that's exactly the kind of experience that we're interested in seeing here. You know, it's about there's definitely an element of trust there, and Save the Children has been really front and center in building that trust, building that experience into a digital platform like Primero. So we always have to tip our hats to Save for their enormous investment in the work. I'm going to shoot back to you now, Kholoud, for a follow-up question, because I know that you have a great team there at UNRWA that's crunching numbers and data and creating dashboards and all of these things. I'd like to ask you a question about evidence generation. So this question comes from a colleague in the field that says, does technical innovation within Primero support evidence-based decision-making and program adaptation for your programs? And if you could give us some examples of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, as we've started using Primero since late 2021, so in the 5 fields of UNRWA operations, yes, this year, actually, we're now in the final stages of having a report that talks about a trend analysis of the protection issues that we're collecting data, and it helped us in looking at, especially comparing between different fields, and even within the same area of operation, it will help us looking at what are the trends that we're facing, be it within child protection or some gender-based violence. So it will help us. We're finalizing this report, and definitely we will share it with all concerned. But it will help us as an evidence through which we can both enhance our service provision, strengthen our referral mechanisms within UNRWA and with our external service providers, as well as with advocacy. And also, we're taking it at another level, which is community engagement and prevention, okay? Because our social workers are providing the service and the intervention and the case management to respond to these protection concerns. But also from this data and from the analysis of the Primero data using the dashboard, it helped us to address the issues at the community level, so prevention level, okay? So for example, we're providing the services for, let's say, we're seeing or analyzing and trying to see the linkage between dropout of students from schools and disability, for example. To what extent these two issues are linked. And we're providing the services to X and Y numbers, but again, how we can address this at the prevention level, at community level. The same, for example, on cyberbullying. The number of cases that we're dealing with when it comes to cyberbullying, and how we can take this, for example, and use it at the prevention level, using another, for example, a platform which we have, for example, within our schools, we have the school parliaments. So how we can use these school parliament children to advocate on how we better address the cyberbullying and how we can use it in a more meaningful way. So this is how we're trying to use it. Also enhancing our referrals within UNRWA. We're piloting now Primero with our health program. So our health team, nurses and doctors who are having the first-hand and direct interaction with the children and women, how we can help identify such cases of GBV or child protection cases and refer it to our case managers and social workers. So this is how we're trying to use the data into strengthening our referral mechanisms and our response and prevention level.
You said a lot of very great and wise things there. I love the focus on prevention. That is the gold standard in protection, right? That we would learn enough about the context where we work that we could put programs in place so some of these bad things never happen to children and families in the first place. And I'm very happy that you mentioned the online protection component as well. And hopefully in the next sessions later today and tomorrow, we'll dive a little bit. We'll have a little bit of time to talk about how we start to plan for and work in the online protection space. And of course, referral mechanisms, the referral pathways. This is something that we continue to work with all over the world. Every place is different, and programs change over time. The focus of the programs change over time. So those referral pathways also have to be the focus of our evidence generation. What's working, where they're working, where we need to redirect or find new partnerships. So great answer. Thank you for that, thank you for that, Kholoud. My next question is going to be to Meng, and it's going to be a sharp one because it has to do with money. And everybody likes to make these kind of connections between technology and money. And in a time like we're living through right now, when funds and resources are so hard to come by, I think this is a really pointed question. So here it goes. With all the funding cuts and changes happening, how do you respond to the criticism that spending money on technology is diverting funds away from staff? Tough one, Meng.
Yes, indeed. Robert, you did a very good presentation on what's the lay of the land. We are constrained. All of us are constrained. But at the same time, as far as I know, and I hope everyone agrees here, partners and donors, they're not actually stopping to ask us to do more, even though we're in the constraints. Some of the things that they ask us to do is that, how can we have better efficiencies? How can we actually do more with less? How can we leverage technology to do more from a digital transformation perspective? More because government has moved on already. So from my vantage point, having seen what I've seen and having talked to a lot of different partners and donors, I do see that leveraging digital to do programming better, and in this case, in the child protection arena, if we get it right, that actually unlock the trust that the donor would empower us to do more. And what does that mean in terms of the workforce? Because there is a misnomer that if we use digital more, AI can take our job away. But what I'm hearing from the panelists here is that a lot of the work that happens in the case management sphere is really not something that technology or an AI can replace. You still need case manager to talk to people and so forth. Yes, they will be an upskilling, or to Becky's your point of how to have mentorship, how to make sure that they have actually feel stronger and better in doing their job better or using the technology better. That's by all means, it happens already. So in a nutshell, I do see that with the constraint of funding, but with the ask of doing more things better and more digitally savvy, we will see a shift, but it's a shift for better because it will actually force us to upskill ourselves. It will actually force us to think about how to innovatively do things and not about replacing humans with digital. I hope that's concise enough, Robert. Over back to you.
Good answer. I think that's a good answer. Okay, so seeing that we only have a few minutes left, and we've covered a bit of a range of questions here from programming specific to individual caseworkers, digital platforms. I think what I'd like to do is use the last few minutes to take a question that we have in the Q&A here, and let's keep a nice concise answer so I can get a response from each one of you. So this comes from our colleague Jan, who says, a thing that keeps her up at night, given the rapid pace of technological change and the reduction of resources, what do you think is the most underestimated risk in managing information systems today for child protection? So there's a technology perspective and a programming perspective to this. And I'll ask Becky to reply first.
I mean, I think one is that we are concerned about the trend of having short budgets, short timeframes to do case management without effective time to then transition out or to transition our programming. So we have been thinking about ethical guidance on case management and how do we make sure that those cases, that we have a duty of care to the children that we are working with, even if the funding is changing. And I think that the more that we can really support the systems that already exist, rather than trying to come up with something new or a new solution, which I think is always kind of the trend, is that people like innovation, but making sure that we're innovating based on what we know. I mean, we're over 100 years old as an organization. We need to build on what we have and improve and innovate and move forward, but not always start over. And I think that that's something that we're trying to get across as a united message, especially in these resource constrained times.
So you're not worried about an AI robot that does the case management coming anytime soon? Okay.
I am not.
Great. I'll ask you the same question, Bolaji. What risk should we be keeping our eyes on?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I think Rebecca covered the first half of my initial thoughts around the reusability, because it's pretty much the trend. And even for digital public goods, the idea is to ensure that we could reuse more than build more. And so having more efforts being put into like strengthening existing solutions is very key. But I think when it comes to many of these risks also, I would pretty much also highlight the same security and privacy concerns that I mentioned earlier, because that comes down to maintenance. And so even though we have, there's less resources and all of that, the risk would affect more on the maintenance of the solution over a long span of time. And so when we talk about sustainability, we often say it's about the solution and the people behind the solution in that sense. And so for all of these systems, they still need to be maintained in that sense. And so one of the leveraging factors here is all that we've discussed already around how different partners could work together and how we could all strengthen existing efforts enough that we could keep the solutions running, but not just keep them running, but also keep them in the optimum state, in the sense that as the landscape is evolving, as new vulnerabilities come up, for example, in the security standpoint, as new tactics come up, the solutions could adapt, and there's still the base maintenance process ongoing to ensure that these information systems are still equipped to solve many of the child protection services that they provide. And this is why, for example, for digital public goods at the Alliance, where we have the standard we used to assess, but we also reassess them every year just to ensure that there's still that compliance in that sense. And so it shows the key factor and why we have to keep this running every time, just so we can continue to maintain the solutions.
I couldn't agree with you more on that statement. Software is like having a pet. If you stop feeding it, the end is near. So we have to continue to take care of these things. Kholoud, what would you say is the risk that we need to think more about?
Not really sure, but I think with having us as a community, we're having UN, national, international governments, all of us as a community using Primero, and I think this is in itself I think would address the risk. Why? Because we're not static. Each one of us is trying, to take care of Primero in their own way, and this in itself is a strength that addresses such a risk. Okay, because and again, maybe I'll draw on the example of Gaza. Maybe at the beginning when we were facing this war, we gave on Primero for a short period of time, and then again we felt how we can. It helped us a lot. Okay, it helped us a lot to address the needs of children, the needs of women in a more robust way, together with the other partners that we have on the ground. So working with Save the Children, with HI, with the UNFPA there. So in Gaza, and again working together on even with the unaccompanied children between Gaza and West Bank was really helpful. So I think with having Primero, without having Primero, we won't be able to really provide such a service in an efficient way. So I don't feel the risk there actually. Plus, even with donors and less funds, when having such a data as an evidence helped us to survive, I would say. This is it from my part.
That's a good, positive, and optimistic response to a question about risks. So I like that very much. Phui Meng, you have the last word.
I have to say all the panelists already, said everything I need to say, but I just keep it very, very short. Every risk, every challenge is an opportunity, the way I see it. I think the biggest risk that I'm seeing here is that how do we continue to maintain great quality service for the families and the persons behind each and every case. And I can't agree more with some of the panelists that in order for us to attack or address this risk and take it as an opportunity, we need to continue to grow Primero in a very sustainable way so that we can scale it not by countries, but by number of cases with quality of service that attach behind it. So that's how I think we can address that risk. Over.
I love that. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. We've come to the end of our webinar. Thanks to the panel so very, very much for your support and for joining us. Everybody, give them a nice big round of applause. We know how busy everybody is, so it's great that you took the time to participate and share your experiences and ideas with us. I do want to encourage everybody to join our afternoon session. So if you haven't registered, hopefully the registration's still open, but maybe I can ask Jan just to put the microsite link into the chat before we break. But once again, everybody, look for the recording. It'll be available for you. Appreciate everybody that helped us and took part in preparing for this today. Thanks very much, everyone, and we'll close this session for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you all.